Good evening, everybody. Happy Sunday. Welcome to the Sunday Pub. If you are possibly here for the first time, on the Fireside Discord, we have had a lot of new people turning up lately. So maybe you're here for the first time. Welcome. This is basically just a relaxed, bookish people hangout that I do every Sunday. I realized I had free time on my schedule almost every Sunday evening. And I thought it'd be nice to just hang out with some bookish friends and chat, and people join on screen when they want to. Anyone. You don't have to have a booktube channel. You don't have to have even ever spoken to me in person or on the screen before. And sometimes it's just me. And we have a hardcore crew of regulars who are here almost every week, like Alicia. Hi, good to see you. Like one of my favorite people, Evie. Yes, stupid daylight saving time. It's one of the dangers of like the modern high-tech world we live in. My phone just does what it does when it does it. It updates automatically, and I'm not actually aware of daylight saving time starting and ending and whatever anymore. So I think there were a few people in the America side of the world who were expecting this to have started an hour ago. So just Google, what time is it in Berlin, which is where I live, and you'll always know it starts at 8 p.m. my time, whatever that happens to be everybody else's time. Morton's here, as usual. Good to see you. Osa's here. Trevor is here. Trevor is a rare appearance in the live. Trevor, I think, religiously watches the recording afterwards. He's a replay, team replay, pub replay kind of guy. But good to see you here live, Trevor. Daco is here. Daco's in and out of the pub, but been here a number of times. Good to see you. Nops is here. Daniel's here. Yeah, it's been a week. It's really been a week. How's your week been? My week, I was kind of fluish and not working most of the week. And I get really obsessively focused sometimes when I'm sick, or maybe I just, hey, Max here, good to see you. Maybe I just need distraction from not feeling so great. And I got really into a video game this week. Oh, Fitz is also here. Say hi, Fitz. Yeah, Europe does daylight savings. In fact, the only place I've been in the world which doesn't do it or does it kind of differently is Queensland in Australia. No shit, because they thought it would confuse the cows. And yeah. Yeah, that's always been my approach, Ida, to daylight savings, is not reset any of the clocks. So half the year they're right. And just wait for that to happen. Thornell is also here. I have been today. The question for everyone, obviously, is what are you reading? I am reading Legend by David Gemmell, which is kind of gold in this edition with big axe. If you know this, it's a legendary book called Legend. If you don't know it, you should probably check it out. It's an old, it's weird to me that because I'm old, I never even heard about this book growing up. It was written, I think, in 88, originally, 86 even earlier, which is prime fantasy reading time for me. And I never read it. And I've been wanting to get to it for a long time since I heard about it. But today, this afternoon, I was looking at my new, actually, you can see it right there, my new BPRD paperback omnibus comic. And I've been saying to poor Thornell for weeks, maybe months even, that I wasn't going to start it until I finished my reread of Hellboy. So today I was inspired to pick up my volume 5 of the library editions of Hellboy. And 5 and 6 are maybe the heaviest, thickest. I think 6 is slightly thicker. But I'm getting through, what is it? Darkness Calls and The Wild Hunt, and moving on from there. We have, as always, big Fitz yawn. 2 guests. One is Raf, and one is Evie.
Technically 4 guests. Oh, wait, no, now 3.
And George.
You left.
Good to see you both.
Hello.
How are you guys doing?
Pretty good. I had almost forgotten how much I fucking love Hellboy. Oh my God, it's so good. The comic, not the movies. The movies are, I don't know about the new one. Haven't seen it. I've heard bad things almost universally. But the comics are just so good. They're so good. Let me just go through.
Ida, yes, Legend is worth reading.
Colton's
Matt
here.
has probably already said that, but it's definitely worth reading.
Alicia is reading Catwoman Lonely City.
Okay.
Never heard of it. Is that like a story arc of Catwoman comics, or is it the whole title is Catwoman Lonely City? Ida, yeah, it's worth reading. It's interesting. It's so old that I will forgive it a lot of tropes because they weren't totally worn out, irritating tropes back then. But there is literally in the first 10 pages, there's like a three-page enemies to lovers thing. Not enemies to lovers, but like we don't like each other to lovers. It's like an insta-love thing, which I kind of forgive in a 1986 book because obviously he wanted, for most of the book, he wanted these two people to be a couple. And that is, I assume, meaningful in the later story. And he just set it up where they meet and they're very grumpy at each other. And the next time you see them, they're in bed, basically. And I was like, I mean, there's no like annoying sexy time descriptions or anything. It's just like, that's their relationship development. And it happens basically over a couple of pages. And I winced a bit at that. But it's nice how he's setting it up, because the whole thing sort of rotates around Drust the Legend, who is this heroic warrior with a very storied past. And he doesn't even appear for the first like 50, 60 pages of the book. It's just other characters talking about him and reacting to stories about him and what he might be doing today.
It's
and if he's
really
dead
interesting in a lot of ways, that book. And
yeah,
like the way it is basically David Gemmell talking, like coming to terms with his like cancer diagnosis, basically, on the one hand. And he has later said that he was inspired by the Battle of the Alamo before he actually knew how the battle what actually went down, which is why the book is far more heroic than it than reality ever was.
Yeah, the Alamo wasn't so pretty. Yeah.
Also,
Never
at Snitch and Evie, yes, Hollow is a fantastic book. I love it. It's it is surrealist nonsense, but very good surrealist nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that comes across and is interesting for me with Legend, that comes across really strongly, and also Josh Red Fury Books was saying this when he read it for the first time, I think last year. We're both older, to the point where you're starting to notice what getting old actually feels like. And this is a big theme in Legend. Like Druss is this heroic, like everybody knows who he is, and he's got this big heroic history. And he's about maybe 10 years older than I am now. And he groans when he gets up because his back hurts and, you know, stuff like that. He's old, you know. And that's an interesting thing to see in a fantasy book. Like your fantasy heroes are normally not suffering from aching knees and sore back and
arthritis.
Kind of thing. Arthritis, exactly. They're not old, you know. Nobody's old in fantasy, really. Whoops, Raph disappeared. So let's see. Morton is almost finished with Shadow of the Gods. How is it, Morton?
What are you reading, Matt?
Also, I'm reading Legends that I just spent the last 5 minutes talking about.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Oh, I totally zoned out and forgot. Sorry. I'm so sorry.
And as of today, I'm finishing my reread of Hellboy.
Oh, nice.
In these lovely but extremely heavy library editions, which are huge and beautiful. Also is reading Perhaps the Stars. How are you liking Perhaps the Stars? I actually just talked to someone who had read all four. That's the fourth book of Terra Ignota, yeah.
Which you
I haven't read that one yet. I've read the first three.
Okay.
And I spoke to, I was in my favorite amazing local bookstore, Otherland, and the lady behind the counter, I was talking to her, and she said a friend of hers loved the first three, Terra Ignota, and almost DNF'd the fourth one.
I've heard opposite things where the fourth one is amazing.
I find that hard to imagine as well. I mean, like, the first three are so much building up to what must be happening in the fourth one that I can't imagine it being anything other than pretty damned epic. Nupsa read Shadsworth. Wait a sec. Raph's back. Wondering what to pick up next. Yeah, I don't know. I had a very intense Tchaikovsky.
I mean, if you want to keep the Tchaikovsky train going, you can pick up a Tchaikovsky novella, Ogres, which is pretty universally beloved. I haven't read it myself.
Or Dogs of War, which I read recently. It's a bit bigger than a novella, but shorter than most novels. It's not.
Would you say it was a short novel then?
It's a novelette. No, I don't. All of these things, all of these names. It's short. Yeah,
It's a short book.
Yeah, it's not a chunky doorstopper, but was awesome. I was trying to buy Bearhead, the one that comes after, on the weekend, and failed because they didn't have it in, but they ordered it for me.
Nice.
Brian approves of the RAF plop.
Yeah. Did also say something about how they like the perhaps the stars, because I really loved it, but it's a big book.
Yeah, that is. I think that's kind of what pumped my brakes, so to speak. I was like, I don't feel like a really thick book right now, and I went to something else.
Isn't like the typesetting different from the other books? Like it's
I haven't looked at it.
Okay.
In that detail, but that would be a nasty trick if it is. I hate it when they do that within one series, typeset the books completely differently. So
I don't know, like with perhaps the start. The audiobook is also twice the length of everything else, so it's not typesetting. It's definitely the length of the book.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it on my shelf, each individual book over there is about half the size of Perhaps the Stars. So
I don't know which one I'm thinking of then. I don't know. Whatever. Ignore me. I'm obviously my brain's
Rogue DNF'd Legend. Okay. How far in did you get? I am now almost 100 pages in, and I'm liking it, but it's slowly building up to the thing that you know is going to be. I mean, like the basic idea of the story is there's a siege.
Yeah. And
Drust the Legend is pulled in to help defend the city from the siege. And it's the beginning of the book is a lot of sort of slow build up to getting to the actual siege.
What I find interesting is I think there's a very specific sort of parallel between Drust the Legend and Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard.
Yeah,
obviously, but in the way that the first Conan story that Howard wrote is the Phoenix on the Sword, which is also old King Conan and not young Conan. So all the stuff is behind him. Basically, everyone knows what kind of hero he is, and then you focus on all kinds of other people doing stuff while the shadow of this big sort of hero kind of hovers in the background in a way. And I think that was probably deliberate on Gemmel's part when he wrote Legend in that regard.
Right. Brian says he's reading a book that everyone seems to love, but Malazan is a hard act to follow. I always say that Malazan almost ruined fantasy for me. And then when I'm feeling less bombastic, I say it redefined what I want in good fantasy. Sometimes I don't want good fantasy. I just want bubblegum fantasy, and that's fine. But Malazan is like there is not much that compares to it.
Yeah, talking about bubblegum fantasy, I have to actually read Elantris next week, so that's going to be interesting.
Good luck.
You don't have to read anything.
No.
Yes and no.
Assigned assignments.
Yes and no. It's like I have this project, and part of that project is also reading Elantris. And since I'm, I set this project, and I decided I'll do this. This is going to be part of it. I don't know if I'm like it. Maybe I'll like it. Who knows?
I admire your reading discipline, Raf. I don't have even a scrap of it comparatively. It's interesting. Ron also wasn't a fan of Legend. Okay. Interesting.
I mean, it is certainly old, and you can see.
Oh yeah, no.
You notice its age. It's like late 70s, early 80s fantasy in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's and I've noticed that with a few things I've read, not like in the last year, where I was kind of going back to something I read a long time ago, or I was reading something that I missed a long time ago. My tastes have changed so much since I was alive in the 80s that a lot of it I'm just like, I'm not that into this. So yeah.
No, of course.
Recommendation for ogres. I would also recommend, like, for a really short, very slim novella, Elder Race was a cool little story by Tchaikovsky. And like I said, Dogs of War is awesome and is quite short. I read it in a couple days.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Elantris is entertaining. I don't know. I feel like I have very specific things that I find very entertaining. I'm not sure if Brandon Sanderson is capable of delivering that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Which is not me saying he's a bad writer. It's just that like what he does and what he thinks he's best at is not necessarily what I think works best for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I to be honest, and again, I'm not dissing him as a writer. I've enjoyed some of his books, but I don't expect that much from Sando. Like Robin Hobb and Steven Erikson set a bar where I'm like, okay, this is as good as it gets in fantasy, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And nobody really comes that close. And everything else is somewhere sort of below it. And Sando is definitely below it. But his stuff's fun.
I can't believe I'm defending Sanderson. But to be fair, I don't think that's what he's aiming for, to Raph's point. Like I don't think his purpose is to be like this grandiose, like deeply thematic, emotional thing, which from everything I've heard, like there are apparently themes and emotions that he does draw out of people, but like comparatively, I don't think he's aiming for the same thing that Robin Hobb and Erikson are going for. So
yeah, of course. Totally. That's what I meant. It's like he's doing something and he's doing it very well in some regards. It's just not the thing that I personally am most entertained by. I think like I've read obviously I've read the parts of like Wheel of Time that he wrote, and I've read Mistborn Era 1 and I've read Alloy of Law. And I think like the best of those, or where he played like to the strengths that I see in his writing, was actually Alloy of Law. That was because Sanderson has this very weird, sort of prudish teenage boy humor in a lot of ways. So that buddy cop kind of vibe that he has in Alloy of Law plays to his strengths, because that's exactly kind of the vibe those characters have, and the kind of audience that kind of enjoys that kind of stuff. It has that in a way that other books don't necessarily have. I know that that's like a hot take when it comes to Sanderson fans, because for whatever reason, a lot of people don't like the Wax and Wayne stories, but I think that's where he's the strongest at.
I totally agree with you about him and those books, but him being very good at that particular kind of book was why I didn't like those books very much. Because that kind of humor, like you said, it is kind of teenage boy humor, and it's all so clean. Any of his worlds, I have a really hard time with verisimilitude, because everything is so overly sanitized. It's not sanitized. I mean, it's just clean. I guess that's the way things come out of his brain. But
yeah,
I don't know. When you're making up swear words and you can't just say fuck in a book, I'm always like, okay, I guess you're not writing for me.
To go completely away from Sanderson, a series of books, which is only 2, that I think everyone should read, regardless of what you like or don't like, is the Earth Seed series, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. I just finished Parable of the Talents last night, so I'm on a high.
I would like to read those. I've never read any Butler.
The greatest thing about Octavia E. Butler.
Love out there for Miss Butler. Mrs. Butler, whatever.
Yeah, the best thing about Octavia E. Butler, beyond, her just being Octavia E. Butler and incredibly important and so forth, is that a lot of her audiobooks are free on Audible, including Parable of the Sower and Kindred and like another one are all free at the moment.
That's cool.
So in case you were thinking about it and you have an Audible account, this is your excuse to go and actually listen to these books finally.
By the way, I don't know, just as a German PSA for Raph, you probably know all of this because you're much more into audiobooks than I am, but I only discovered recently that, first of all, you can get a Berlin library card.
Yeah.
For $10. You don't have to live in Berlin. They don't check anything. They don't ask for any kind of ID if you do it online. If you do it in the the library, you have to present all sorts of ID and proof of address and stuff. But online, they don't. And they have a huge selection through Libby of audiobooks in fantasy and science fiction in English. They've got a lot of pretty good stuff. So I don't know if you're on that already.
The problem is that the selection of audiobooks does depend on your local library, and the one that I have access to in Marburg.
No, what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. You can get a Berlin City library card.
Now that sounds like a good idea.
Local in Berlin, and then when you connect to Libby through the Berlin Library, and Berlin has a hell of a lot of English speakers, I imagine they probably have the best selection of English audiobooks of any library in Germany.
That's good to know, because like the local one that I have here does mostly have like a selection of audiobooks, not through Libby, some other app. I don't know which one it is. And they are heavily focused on German audiobooks, which means for like English authors, German translations. And I don't want to do that.
No, that's garbage. Back to Evie. You were hyping up. Octavia.
Yeah, I was yelling about Earthseed. Yeah. I was just gonna also make a joke that, everyone, well, is it really a joke? It's kind of true, honestly. So the whole premise of the Earthseed series, because I refuse to call it a duology.
Fitz has a halo. Has everyone seen that?
Nice. Is that it's a philosophy. The Earthseed religion is a philosophy, faith, and it builds and whatever. Why can't Earthseed become what science? Like, I would rather have Earthseed religion as a real life religion that stemmed from a fictional book than Scientology. If anyone's a Scientologist, sorry, not sorry. For the
look,
there's nothing to apologize for dissing a dodgy religion.
I do very much respect L. Ron Hubbard for a man who had one very simple dream, and that has to be to have his own navy, and he got it. I respect that part of it. The rest,
he achieved a hell of a lot. I mean, he wrote the science fiction author who wrote in the late 60s, early 70s, an essay on how to found a religion and become rich. Sort of as a joke at the time. It was taken as humor at the time. And then he went on to do it. I mean, that's impressive.
And he got his own navy and sailed around the seas for like 3 years and had like all his believers dig for gold that he supposedly buried like in a previous life. And that's the kind of life I want to live in the future. I want to have my own navy.
Do you want to be a religious scam artist to achieve it?
Theoretical and made it practical.
Yeah. It's totally crazy. Like every time I hear anything about Scientology, I mean, there are a lot of religions in the world, and I don't like all of them equally. But like Scientology, every time I hear anything about it, I'm like, that's not a religion. That's a guy who made up some weird shit with technology. And like, why are people doing this?
I think like there's a historical reason for that. It's like if you look at like the late 40s, early 50s, you have a lot of this stuff going on where now that, the early 20th century is when people realize that sometimes talking about your problems can actually help. And there is such a thing as an inner life. And then we did the same thing that we always do when we have like a sort of like a new sort of discipline in the sciences. We think that it can solve every single problem, which is sort of where Scientology comes in, like first with Dianetics and then like full on Scientology. It's like, we can expand the powers of the mind. And there's a lot of stuff going on at the time. You read something like Morning of the Magicians by, what's their names, Berger and the other guy whose name escapes me at the moment, which is from like 50 something. So I see where that is coming from and why it happened at that time and why it was so incredibly successful. What I don't necessarily understand is why it's still successful, because I feel we kind of moved beyond that. But like for the late 40s, early 50s, I totally get why it was so successful at the time.
Yeah.
Well, to go back to Earthseed, Mac.
You have to be really careful to enunciate the D, because the first 3 times you said it, I thought, oh, Le Guin, cool. And then you mentioned Butler. I was like, what?
The good part is that both are incredibly good. So
yeah, sure.
To go back to that, I think it's an amazing exploration of religion and faith and what that does to an individual and community, and Like, again, the way that Butler writes, she doesn't tell you this is the right way, this is the wrong way. She just presents the information,
shows you a bunch of stuff,
and lets the reader make their interpretation, which makes the main character so divisive, apparently. And it's just, it's spectacular. It's spectacular.
Ron, Battlefield Earth was the first big book I ever read. I also read it when I was, I don't know, teenager.
Freaking John Travolta in locks or dreadlocks.
I have not seen the movie. I just heard. Luckily, I heard more than enough about it.
If you say, Ron, that your sister's boyfriend was in the religion based on Stranger in the Strangeland, what you're saying is that he just was like into swinger clubs, right?
I was going to say he was a hippie who liked to have a lot of sex.
Because that's like the one thing that I remember from Stranger in the Strangeland is like that it's all about group sex all the time.
Yeah,
which is fine. Don't get me wrong.
Into that.
Yeah. I have no problems with that.
Read Le Guin. This weekend I bought the word for world is forest.
It's so good.
I bought damn it, I'm blanking on what the other one was called. Oh, Lathe of Heaven, her other angry book. I mean, a lot of her books are angry, but they're the angriest I've heard. Yeah. Angry. So I will be reading a lot of Le Guin because I also have Left-Handed Darkness and Dispossessed sitting on my shelf unread so far. So,
you haven't read them before? I thought for some reason I just assumed that you had read like at least Left-Hand of Darkness before.
No, I've read Earthsea. I've never read any of her science fiction. I read Earthsea like a million years ago, but
I personally like her science fiction stuff a lot. I think Word for World is Forest is relatively short and is a very angry one. So if you're into angry novels about how colonialism sucks and how destroying the environment really sucks, this is the book for you.
Yeah, I figured by the title and knowing Le Guin, I'm like, okay, this is going to be an angry ecology book. But
it is a positively angry book though, so that's the good part. It's not leaving you all depressed.
It's a here are problems that frustrate me and should be solved kind of angry. Yeah. Yes, Rogue, you should read not just Wizard of Earthsea. That's a good start, but the later books are also awesome, and I want to reread them. I got a nice bind up special edition of it on my shelf, and I would really like to get to it. Rokennen's World is one that I keep hearing references to and people mentioning, but I know nothing about it. Haven't read it. But if you like comics, or even if you don't, read this. Not this one, because this is the expensive fancy edition for people who are extreme fans of Hellboy like me. But you can also, Colton recently got the paperback omnibus box set, which is basically 3 graphic novel size, binds together. It's not everything that's in library editions. Library editions collect almost everything that is Hellboy, not Hellboy adjacent like BPRD and the other things, but it's some really good storytelling. Oh my God. And it's all based, like all of the stories are based at least in some way on existing mythology and fairy stories, and a little bit of Lovecraft is in there, and it brings all of these things together in a really, really amazing way. Awesome stuff. Open it a little, Matt. All right. Big end papers. The nicest thing about it actually is that it's bigger than the comics. Because all of these were drawn and digitally scanned to be printed, the pages could be bigger, and they just printed them in a much larger format than the comics. So you get even bigger, gorgeous art. They're really, really nice. And every one of them has got a skull on the spine, because Mike Mignola loves drawing little skulls. That's his sort of trademark little skull.
Did he ever work for Warhammer?
I do not think he did.
Because that's the other property that always has skulls everywhere.
Yeah, and he like I keep. What is Fitz doing? Fitz, she's like trying to climb the wall or something. I follow him on the various social medias, and he does a lot of sketchbook posts on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, where it's just pencil sketches of things that he's doodling and working on and thinking about. And every second one of those has like a little skull down in the corner just because. Which I totally understand. Little skulls.
I remember like we used to play the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game, like the 2nd edition, and they have like all the characters, and one of them is the halfling courier, and they have this image of a halfling riding a pony because he's like a courier rider. And for Warhammer reasons, part of like the harness of the horse has skulls on its harness. He's the good guy, right? He's clearly the good guy riding, but still the pony has like a skull on its harness. Colton, I agree with Evie. Do that. Yes. Colton wants to make a booktube channel, and he might call it "The Word for Soul is Story." That's a good title. That is a very good title. Do that, and do it soon. Although the whole being on camera nervousness thing may be a bit of a challenge if you want to do that. I wasn't paying attention. We also have a Briton, of course.
I know. It's
Hello, Britain. Long time no see.
Oh, I know. It's been such a long time.
Something like, I don't know, 20 hours maybe.
Raph, not gonna lie,
20 hours too long.
I'm sorry. I thought you were making a blind joke. I'm so sorry, Raph.
Which I would totally do, but in this case, it's because Britain was a guest on my live stream yesterday.
Nice.
Which went for 4 hours because we clearly have.
You obviously had something to talk about.
Now we're also really bad at knowing when to shut up, I guess.
I can attest to that.
Yeah,
I have witnessed that. Yep.
Please see previous Sunday pubs.
Please see 40 previous Sunday pubs. Yes. Mac, he did some awesome concept art. He's done a bunch of interesting things. He also worked very closely with Del Toro on the Hellboy movies. And in one of the nice things about these volumes is that in the back,
yes.
there are a bunch of sketchbooks. So like pencil sketches and stuff from him. And there's also, he writes commentary on each of the stories in the book. And one of them, he was like, I actually got this story by scouting locations with Guillermo del Toro for the movie. And we were here and here, and we saw this, and it inspired me. There's a story called The Vampire of Prague. And they were in Prague scouting locations for the movie. And that's where he got that story from, which is also kind of interesting.
Oh, nice.
Yes, Colton, we are nice. We are nicer than you deserve. We can't help ourselves.
I did read The Great Wen today, and I have to say I really enjoyed it.
Wait, you finished it?
I finished the whole thing. I did nothing but read Alan Moore all day. I started early and I finished late.
My goodness.
It's not that long a book.
My reading has totally suffered this week because I was off work, which normally you would think I had a lot of time for reading. But what I did instead was get totally obsessed with a video game called Medieval Dynasty, which is a survival-ish game where, you gather resources and you build things and that kind of stuff. And it's pretty realistically set in the Middle Ages in sort of alternative Poland, because the developers are in Poland. And you build a village, basically, and hire people or find peasants to work on your farms and ride all over the place doing all sorts of stuff. It's really, I can get very obsessive about
that's a really interesting thing.
Games.
Like like 2 weeks ago when I came back from Poland, like last time I talked about the concentration camps, but there was an interesting other thing. We went to like a local, like regional museum, history museum, and they had like a lot of stuff, different costumes and stuff from like the local villages and the local like village culture from like, obviously medieval times to like the 19th century. And it's one of those things I love about traveling, going to like these smaller like local history museums, because one of the things I learned there is that for a long time, the color you painted your house had like a lot of like messages. For example, if a house was painted blue, that meant that the woman living in that house was available for marriage, and other colors meant that the persons living in there are married or are widowed, or and so forth. And it's just like one of those small things that I'm like, I'm gonna keep that in mind, because next time I'm running a medieval style fantasy role playing game, that shit's gonna come up, and it'll be like, and really.
It sounds totally made up fictional. It sounds like some world building thing that an author or a GM would do for a book or a game. But it's cool that's like actual fact history is kind of weird sometimes. They should have put that in the game, because one of the things that's a big deal in the game runs for many years.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's called Dynasty, right?
It is called Dynasty, right? So you're building at the beginning. You're just trying to survive from the weather and the animals, and eventually you build some buildings, and eventually you've got a village, and eventually you take a wife or a husband, and you end up with children. And when your character dies, you play one of your children. You just move on to playing a child, and you have to organize that for people in your village, like. You hire men and women, and they eventually get married and have children, and you have to manage all of that.
Yeah,
so I could have painted some houses blue, but
maybe.
Yeah,
and that's like the things I like about it. Is like one of the things I feel is sometimes sad, because of the way that a lot of fantasy, medieval style fantasy that we have these days is written by Anglo-American authors.
Yeah,
their image of the Middle Ages is very much focused on the UK, on England mostly, and sometimes France, and it's a very different style of the Middle Ages compared to, say, Germany, what is now Czech Republic, Poland, and so forth, like that sort of like Central Europe, I guess, in a way.
Yeah,
because
this has a real feeling. I don't know about the like the visible culture, but the written or audible culture in this game, like all of the characters in the game that are voiced were voiced by Polish actors in English, but they have very clear Polish accents. And all of the names, like when you meet new characters or you find people to join your village, their names are Agnieszka and Siloslava, and they've got all of these very Eastern European names, and all of the towns have it definitely has a much more Eastern European feeling.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that like large parts of what is now Germany also had that same feeling. Obviously, a lot of it has been erased by history, but it's and I really like that, and I wish we had more stuff that is like that, because it's really cool.
Yeah. I would have liked more of that in The Witcher, like more of the Eastern European historical medieval feeling and less of the fantasy, maybe. Jerome, what are you doing here? I thought you were sick. Go to bed. But he says, I was in Poland this year in an area where they built their churches over the rivers because the Russian rulers told them that they couldn't build their churches on the land. That is so fucking Polish. I've got a lot of Polish friends, and they're all contrarians and creative.
Oh, one other thing that I found really interesting when I was in like Łódź like 3 weeks ago now, we also went to the film museum, because Łódź for during the communist times was the city where all the Polish film production happened, because they have like the studios there, and they have like the film university there and everything, and that film museum was just really cool, and it was the place where the first like Moomin TV show was done, like puppet TV show and animated show was done in the 70s and 80s.
Yep.
When my personal hero Tove Jansson, got an offer from Disney and told Disney that she didn't believe that Disney would do her work justice, so she went to like a Polish company instead.
Fair enough. Disney is an odd company at best.
And Toby Johnson was like a very, very specific, very political person in her own right. So
yeah, Thornall, Anno, I have not tried, but I have played a lot of Civ, and I'm looking forward to Civ. What is it, 7? The new one that's coming out. I'm very much looking forward to that, and that will probably take over my entire life for a month when it comes out, because I can get very, very into games like that. Speaking of games, my buddy Brian, we've been texting back and forth about Baldur's Gate 3. I played it already before he started, and he's been keeping me up to date. But you lost your fire for BG3. I see. I can understand it. There's a weird pacing thing in that game. It's got really clear acts, which are very defined. Like in Act 1, you can only get up to a certain point, and then once you go past that point, you're in Act 2. And Act 1 was introduction to the game and exploration. Act 2 was kind of dramatic and dark and whatever. And then Act 3 starts with a big introduction again. Like you go into Act 3 expecting like more excitement, and what you get to start with is another new place that you kind of have to explore, and there isn't really that much going on to start with and whatever. Thornall, I have put many hours into Stellaris already. One of my very good friends that I play online with is a big Stellaris head, and we have taken over the universe multiple times together. We always do it as an allied thing, but
for me, the game that like I probably sunk the most hours into while not noticing that I was doing it was definitely like back in the days, whatever edition of Civilization I was playing at the time. I was like,
Civ, I played Civ 6 earlier this year, like where I was like, how late is it? What?
It's so deceptive. You go like, I'm just going to play one more round, right? I'm just
I'm just going to build one thing over here.
And then you look back at the time. It's like, why is it 5 a.m.? What happened?
Yeah.
To be fair, that's any game. I feel like it.
Yeah, but some of them. I mean, Medieval Dynasty is also like that because you've got so many things to manage, and after a certain point, you can like I've got a village now which I think has 20 people in it, 30 something buildings. I'm growing crops. I'm breeding pigs. I'm doing all this stuff, and I get it all running. And then you think, okay, I'll build one more building.
Yeah.
And while you're building that building, you get a notification that another building, something broke, and another building has run out of a resource they need, and a person has got a problem they want you to solve. And then all of a sudden it's 2 hours later.
Yeah.
It's
I think
crazy.
the problem with Civ is mostly because it is technically round-based. You have these seemingly discrete bits of time. Like I'm just do like one more round. It's like playing a board game, and then you kind of lose track and realize that yes, that round will take you like an hour because you have
one round isn't a period of time.
It feels like a period. It
exactly
looks like a period of time, but it is not.
No. Okay. So there's new DLC coming out for Stellaris. I think Thornall means. Yeah, Nico, the guy that I play online with, is a huge Stellaris head. I'm a bit less, and we haven't played it in a long time.
Okay.
But if there's a new DLC coming out, I imagine I'll be hearing about it from Nico, who may join the stream in the chat later on.
He's the whatever Fantasy Verlag guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know him from the Kraken, and we got along there, and then we realized we both play video games a lot on the same consoles, so we have had periods where I spoke to him more often than any other person, just because we were playing something every night.
Speaking of the Kraken, that's like one thing that like the Great Wen gave me a lot of not Chaosium, but definitely Pelgrane vibes. In that The main character is a secondhand book dealer, and he works at a secondhand bookstore in London, and he comes into possession of an obscure and possibly dangerous book. And then he ends up in what is basically a surrealist version of London that is very much
that
like
sounds
Dreamlands.
a lot like a
combination
that Pelgrane put out for a game.
It is
Or
very
a whole
much like a
game.
combination of Bookhounds of London and Dreamhounds of Paris in a lot of ways. And I'm like me being someone who has both of those and spent way too much money at Pelgrane Press Kickstarters. I'm like, this is so my thing.
I have heard of sorry.
Has anyone played Black Myth Wukong? I've heard of it. I've looked at videos and I thought it looks too Souls-like for me.
I know Stephen Pacey's in it. He plays one of the monkeys. Thought that was pretty funny.
The coolest thing about it is I grew up on an old Chinese action series called Monkey, in English anyway. It was called Monkey. It was dubbed when I watched it in Australia as a kid. And it's the traditional Chinese mythological story of Journey to the West, where the main character is the Monkey King. And he's traveling with a monk called Tripitaka, and it's the same myth that Black Myth Wukong is kind of loosely
looks
based
good
on.
though.
It looks really good, but it just looked too fighty for me. My tastes are drifting away from really fighty games into more.
Man, I thought you liked the Souls games.
Not so much. I liked. I played. I think I got about 2 meters or something into Bloodborne and gave up, where I was just like, "This is too fucking hard." And I played Elden Ring because they downgraded the difficulty of a lot of things there and made it possible to actually just sort of go around some bosses and kind of avoid them. And there weren't so many choke points with a boss that you have to try and kill 150 times before you can keep going, which
I just don't have the patience to play Souls games.
I don't have it's a personality thing. One of the guys I play with online, he loves the Souls-likes or the Souls games. And he will literally try 150 times to kill a boss and be happy when he's done. And I'm like, I try 20 times and I want to throw the controller at someone. It's just too repetitive and frustrating for me. I don't get it.
A lot of people have been telling me about this Max Gladstone individual.
That's interesting. A sci-fi inspired by Journey to the West. That sounds kind of cool.
The craft sequence, or which one?
The Empress of Forever by Max Gladstone, says Ron. That sounds really interesting. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm gonna Google that really quickly.
I still have to read Max Gladstone. I have my good friend Oso, who is currently doing all my thumbnails, is a huge Max Gladstone fan. And obviously everyone loves This Is How We Lose the Time War. So I guess it's... and I'm subscribed to his Substack, so I'm reading whatever he's writing when he's not writing fiction. I haven't gotten to reading Max Gladstone yet.
Yeah, I've read I love This Is How You Lose the Time War, and I have actually found Dead Country by Max Gladstone. I guess it's a series. I don't know if it's one of his later works, like latest works, or one of his earlier ones, but I want to read his solo work, and then Amal El-Matar's
she has a new one coming out later this year, or the beginning of January, I think, is what's called.
It's her.
The River Has Roots.
Yes, it's her only not like other
non-poetry.
Than there's like a honey related book that she did. It's like poetry, and it's basically impossible to find. This is essentially her like debut.
I mean, she's done some poetry collections and stuff. I mean, she mostly started out as a poet and not as like a prose writer, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm very much looking forward to The River Has Roots.
So am I.
So
also,
would you say,
Carnal
Evie?
Dead Cells is amazing.
Evie, would you say that This Is How We Lose the Time War is something that I would actually enjoy, or is that something I should stay away from because I'm Very much the wrong kind of person for that.
So I know that it's divisive, and I can't put my finger on it. Like, I'm terrible at gauging if people are gonna like stuff.
Yeah.
And I understand why it's divisive. Like, regardless of whether you think purple prose is good or bad, like what the definition of it means, if that means it's good or bad. For me, the project of the book with this dual narrative of red versus blue, and it's a sapphic romance, and literally their like writing styles starting to merge into a one singular different writing style from either of them. Because Max Gladstone wrote one. I don't know who wrote what, but Max Gladstone wrote one perspective, and Amal El-Mohtar the other.
The other one. Yeah.
The craft of it, and then the actual execution of that project was, I think, incredible.
That's sort of where I think it might be something I'm really interested in, because I do obviously like people that use words well. That's sort of like the one thing that I'm really interested in. Like, good prose is something I enjoy, and by good prose I mean someone who just knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it's definitely like you can definitely argue there's no point to this book, like it's all vibes, and I get that criticism, but I think that's also not what they were going for.
Vibes are also fine.
Oh, by the way, Evie, you will be interested in that. Recently, on his Substack, Max Gladstone waxed very, very enthusiastically lyrical about The Spear Cuts Through Water.
Fuck yeah! Sorry.
Yeah, it's a decent book.
I have to take a moment just because Nerdy Kathy is from Australia and up very early.
I was going to say that's fucking early.
Yeah, she's been writing on the far side that she'd really, really like to join, but timing wise, it's not so great. But the timing just changed. I don't remember what went which way, but maybe it's a bit more to her advantage at the moment. Good to see you, Kath. Or do people call you Kaza? You probably don't like that, but it's very Australian.
My friend Jason gave This Is How You Win the Time War a mixed review. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll try it. I'm real picky with sci-fi because I get frustrated with it a lot.
I'm kind of picky with time travel.
Same. I'm also not really into time travel.
Sometimes it's done really well, and often it's done in ways that just make me scratch my head.
I just really like people experimenting with language and with writing and sort of like pushing the envelope and like what you can do. So the idea of having two people write one perspective each and basically writing letters to each other, and through those letters creating the novel, I think is just like something I want to see how it works, because I appreciate the way that works. The same way I did on that level kind of enjoy reading Finnegan's Wake. I'm like, it's a fucked up book, but I like the way that he wrote it in like in normal prose, and then substituted words and like tried to make them weirder and weirder and see how far you can bend language. That's something I appreciate, because I think it's important to play around with language like that if you want to get a feel for it and want to sort of improve your craft as a writer in general. So I like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, as Ron says, the writing is the point, and I think that's valid. And I totally think that's valid. I mean, I am a huge fan of experimental. I'll give a book a lot of leeway if it's trying to do something I haven't seen everybody do. I really like seeing authors stretch a bit and use muscles they're not used to using, and do something a little more interesting. Anna Smith Spark, I read a novella that was written by her and Michael R. Fletcher,
which is getting a special edition, by the way.
Yeah, I hate to say I don't really think it deserves it.
That's the one you DNF'd because you didn't like it, the Fletcher part, right?
Yeah, I DNF'd it like 20-30 pages from the end, because there was just a few things bang 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 one after the other that made me want to throw the book across the room. But the part that I think they had clear division of labor. Anna Smith Spark wrote the internal perspective of a demon, and Michael R. Fletcher wrote the city around the demon. It was also a siege story. There's a very tense siege. People can't leave the city, and everyone's freaking out, and there's a demon on the loose. And she wrote the internal perspective of the demon, and she wrote it in such a way that I was like, this feels alien, you know, and to me, I was like, why hasn't everyone ever written a demon in such a way that they feel like complete aliens, like they're hard to understand and they're hard to relate to because their perspective is so non-human, you know?
Yeah,
and she did that. She did that really well with a lot of experimental prose. Like there are bits of it that have kind of no or weird punctuation, and it's kind of, it feels like flow of thought kind of stuff. And it was interesting. You know, it wasn't necessarily fun to read, but it was interesting.
It's the same way that I felt like when I first read The Blade itself, right?
Yeah.
And you encounter the Bloody Nine for the first time. Like, this is like a brilliant way of dealing with like the idea of a berserker rage kind of thing. And that kind of thing. Like, someone had to try this for the first time, and now it's something that I have like in what I would call my vocabulary as well, like my encyclopedia in as Umberto Eco would call it. And that's helpful because now I can use the same thing if I want to.
Yeah, Rogue. I also have her Court of Broken Swords or whatever it's called. The first book of that trilogy. I haven't read it yet. I've heard from a lot of people that she's kind of hard to read sometimes, that it's very wordy. But I'm a little fascinated to read more by her from this one bit, which is weird because it was a short novella that I DNF'd because it annoyed the crap out of me.
But it sounds like.
But her part of it was kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, through no fault of her own.
No,
Before I drop, because I do have to drop. I want to also say, so Earth Seed series, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents by Octavia E. Butler. Please read that. And also Blackwater by Michael McDowell. I finally finished it. It is fantastic. Y'all should read it.
Because of the really pretty new paperback editions, I bought the first one. And I'm yet to read it.
Which one is that?
Blackwater by Michael McDowell. It's a gothic horror family saga in the early 20th century. Set in the early 20th century.
Set in the South in America.
Yep.
Sounds interesting.
Written in the 80s by the same guy who wrote the screenplay for Beetlejuice.
Okay.
I have a problem that you don't have, Raph.
Yeah.
I can be made to buy a book just because someone designed a really pretty cover for it.
It's one of the superpowers that blind people have. It saves us from going into like a bookstore and just browsing the shelves and buying way too many things because they look good.
Yeah, no, it really is a superpower. Like I am so susceptible as a designer and a photographer. I'm so susceptible to like, ooh, pretty. And then I'll grab something and it turns out to be not that good. I did actually check. I mean, Blackwater is very well loved. And I know a number of people who quite like it. So I don't know. But like Southern Gothic, horror, both not really so much my thing. But yeah, Blackwater is horror. Southern Gothic horror, apparently. I haven't read it yet, but yeah. We'll see. Yeah, Evie is gone. Evie had to go. She screwed up because of the time change.
Yeah.
She screwed up her scheduling.
I have to go back into the Mormon mines, I guess.
You don't have to.
Yes, I kind of have to because I said I will do this, and that's sort of the things. Like if you make grand announcements, you kind of sometimes have to commit, I guess.
Yeah, I suck at that.
I mean, technically, I don't have to read Rough Stone Rolling to make a video about Mormonism. At this point, I feel confident that I've done all the research I should have. But on the other hand, early Mormon history is just like incredibly entertaining to read about because it's basically just Western history. Like,
yeah.
And
there's a very cool role-playing game based on it, sort of very loosely.
Yeah, Dogs in the Vineyard.
Yeah, Dogs in the Vineyard is very, very cool. I've played it.
I've never played that. I've played a hell of a lot of Deadlands, and you can use some of the Mormon history stuff to play Deadlands as well.
Yeah, but the supernatural in Dogs in the Vineyard does exist. It's there, but it's all from God and demons. Yeah. And it's much more toned down generally. Although you can play dogs.
Wasn't Vincent Baker brought up within the Mormon?
Yeah,
sort of like,
Vincent Baker's, for the people who don't know anything about role-playing games and what we're talking about, Vincent Baker is the guy who created the game. He was very experimental in role-playing 10, 15 years ago. And he actually doesn't really talk about Dogs in the Vineyard or keep it in print anymore, because I think this is me assuming and guessing that he got a lot of flack from his Mormon family and community. I don't think he's actively Mormon anymore, but he was raised Mormon.
Yeah.
Anyway, Michael, if it makes you feel any better, Blackwater is not a big old book. It's a bunch of different books, and they just got some new, very beautiful paperback editions, which are not like special editions in that they cost a lot of money and are collector's items. They are mainstream paperbacks, but they have really gorgeous covers.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
I'm going to head to the bar and get myself another beer.
Do it. See you shortly. Yeah, I'm interested to read Blackwater, really just because of the cover. But
same, yeah. I want to read Anna Smith Spark too. I want to see what all the fuss is about there.
Yeah, I'm curious.
We need more quality female fantasy writers. I mean,
yeah, I've seen some interviews with her, and I find her kind of not super sympathetic in interviews, but she's obviously extremely smart and wordy. Like,
you think she's mean?
No, I couldn't really put my finger on it that well. What it was, it seemed like maybe she was a bit cynical and sarcastic in a kind of unsympathetic way. I don't really know. I'm not judging any of her books by that because I haven't read any of her books. Colton's mom DNF'd A Woman of the Sword by Sparks, which was a gift from Colton. But he's still going to read it. Yeah, no, I'm curious. I'm curious to read Quarter Broken Knives. That's what it is. It's called Quarter Broken Knives, which always annoys me because there's a sword on the cover, not a broken knife, or not even a knife itself. She's autistic. Yeah, aren't we all? But yeah, that would explain it.
Well, this is interesting. I'm reading her Goodreads profile, and it says previous jobs include petty bureaucrat, English teacher, and fetish model.
Whatever. Yeah, that I remember that. Yeah.
Whatever that means.
It means putting on fetish clothing and having photos taken of you.
Well, okay.
It's exactly that. It could be more, I guess. Added extras and so on. Look who it is. It's a Fitz. Hello, Fitzy Fitz.
It's just, Hello, some of us who are autistic, like me.
Hello, Fitzy Fitz. Yeah, it's become a very broadly used term now because it's a spectrum and it's very hard to define where it starts and ends.
Yeah, I do get kind of annoyed when people are like, "I'm autistic." And I'm like, "Are you sure? Have you been
diagnosed?
Have you actually been diagnosed?" Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I say, aren't we all? Because I happen to know. It seems like a surprisingly large number of people who have been diagnosed and really are on the spectrum somewhere. Yeah. Yes, Riverworld. Thornall. I read Riverworld back when I was a teenager by Philip Jose Farmer.
Kind of goofy.
It is kind of goofy. It is kind of goofy.
Who's supposed to be autistic that I missed?
Anna Smith Spark.
Could be.
Yeah, somebody else. Ada said that.
Yeah. So Ada. I just read the chat and it says like she's autistic, I think, and I'm like, who?
I was saying I've seen Anna Smith Spark speak, and I didn't find her super sympathetic.
Her smug aura mocked him, to quote Frank Reynolds.
I don't even know exactly what it was. Often I'll see somebody give an interview and I think I'd like to have a beer with them, and I didn't think that about her. But yeah, whatever.
But you would have a beer with Adrian Tchaikovsky.
I did have a beer, a few of them, in fact, with Adrian Tchaikovsky. Yes.
That's the thing, is like being the kind of person I want to have a beer with does not necessarily make you a good author.
No.
Nor a good president, to come back to that whole, like, which is the candidate you would rather have a beer with. Like, that's not the point. I guess Trump can be highly entertaining. That does not make him a good president.
I don't care if I want to have a beer with someone who makes world-changing decisions.
Yeah,
nobody I have beers
kind
with.
Of people I usually have beers with. I don't want those people to have like power either.
No, there are a lot of people I love having a beer with who I would not want running even a small third world country, let alone one of the most powerful countries in the world. Yeah, that's not a way to make decisions about politics. It is a way to make decisions about going to the pub.
That's the point.
Just to be clear, Ida, I did not say it was a terrible thing. I said I found her somewhat unsympathetic.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. That's far from saying it's a terrible thing.
No.
Well, apparently Matt from Beard of Darkness is having Scott Lynch on. And I'm like, I texted him, I'm like, did you for real get like Scott Lynch? He hadn't responded, but I'm like, no freaking way.
I saw that. He just brought out, or is about to bring out, Scott Lynch, I mean.
Yeah.
A short story, novella, something like that, set in the world of Locke Lamora.
Yeah. That's so he's slowly inching his way back into writing the same way that Rothfuss did with his novella last year.
Yeah, it seems like he's getting there, which is cool. I would love to read more of those.
I mean,
books.
he has more time than George R. R. Martin. I'll say that.
Huh?
I mean, he has more time than George R. R. Martin. I'll say that.
What do you mean he has more time?
Well, to write the rest of the books.
It hasn't been as long, and he's younger. Yeah. No, that's true. And I mean, it's fun. I always observe the Martin Rothfuss Lynch triangle, and it's interesting how people react, because Lynch was very clear about, like,
his
first of
mental
all,
health.
I'm stopping. I don't know when I'm going to start again. My book's not coming out next year. I have some mental health stuff I want to deal with. And he was very kind of transparent about it all. And everyone's like, I never hear people hassling him about it or being down on him because of it. It's just like, we like your books. We would like to read the next one, but you do what you need to do. Whereas everybody's always jumping on George and Patrick.
He's upset about the way the country's going. Oh, he's just stalling. I saw that on Twitter the other day, and I was just kind of disgusted.
Yeah.
Who's upset about the way the country's going?
Oh, George R. R. Martin.
George.
Yeah, George R. R. Martin has always been an outspoken supporter of the Democrat Party.
Oh, no. I'm not saying, like, he's wrong to be angry at the way the world's going. I was just mad at the people who were giving him shit about it. And they're like, go write the books.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that people have a hard time with him is he's said so many times, it's coming out next year, or here's a sample, I'm working on it, and it's going really well, or, I'm X% done, or whatever.
I think like partly the age stuff matters in that Scott Lynch grew up, and he used to be like active on RPG.net and stuff like. He has I don't want to call him like a digital native, but he understands how to communicate in the age of social media in a way that George R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss don't necessarily understand on like an intuitive level, which makes it easier for him to sort of talk about these issues. George R. Martin just doesn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
He probably also thought they might have come out, and then things changed. I don't know. I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt in this situation.
Yeah, he's also been on and off kind of transparent about it. He also has mental health problems that he's had to deal with, and he's been doing a lot of other things. It's not like he's sitting around doing nothing. He's been pretty busy apparently, but man, I've said it before on Sunday Pubs. I would not want the pressure of having finished the series on TV and not finished the book.
Yeah.
That, like, as soon as I saw how far it was going, when the TV show got to a point where I was like, okay, this isn't in the books anymore, I was like, damn, George, that's not going to be fun. Because you still need to finish the books, please.
I just think he lost interest in Westeros a long time ago, I think. Because, like, before starting that series, he did so many wildly different things like fantasy and science fiction and horror and all this other stuff.
Superheroes.
And I don't think he's sort of like the kind of writer that can stick to the same sort of like world setting and story for like 30 years, 40 years, about 30 years by now. I don't think he's that kind of guy. So I totally get that he's like, creative wise, inspiration wise, I think he's moved on a long time ago, but he kind of has to finish this thing.
Yeah. I can totally imagine. I mean, also if you look at like Westeros.org and the people involved in that, and they've become the keepers of Westeros lore more than George R. R. Martin. In fact, he refers to them. People ask him questions sometimes, and he's like, yeah, they've surely got that somewhere in their database. And they helped write Fire and Blood. They helped write all of these guides that have come out, like the world of Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire. So I think there's probably a large part of it is exactly what you're saying, is that he's a bit over it.
Yeah.
And has other things on his mind, and it's hard to get back into, like, it would be really hard to write a good fantasy novel about a world that you weren't that excited about anymore.
Yeah, which I totally understand that it's a sad thing, but I totally get why that could happen. Yeah,
totally. I'm also that kind of person where I'm excited about something for a time, and then I'm not that much anymore, and I want to do something else.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to ask, because like last week I was at Metal Things. It's like, how did your Black Company reading go at the end of the day?
Good. I mean, I've read it before. It was a reread for me.
I know.
I find that the Cook has a very, very particular prose style, at least when he's writing Croker, and it takes some getting used to and getting into it, because I'm used to his style is almost staccato.
Yeah,
you know, it's so short. Like some of his sentences are like 3 words.
Yeah,
and it's like boom 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 boom, and that has an effect on you. But it's also harder for me anyway to read than somewhat more longer flowing, not so abruptly ending prose. And it took me a little while to get used to that again.
But it's so interesting because the style shifts completely when the analyst changes, and you suddenly have like Mergen has a very, very different style.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's obviously a conscious choice of prose style.
Yeah.
Because he does it so well a different way when he has a different narrator. Yeah. But yeah, it reminds me a lot of Hemingway, actually.
Yeah, I think Hemingway is very much like an influence in that regard, because it's the sort of like soldier mercenary kind of guy who's been through shit and is also incredibly toxically masculine, kind of sometimes aware of the fact, but incapable of actually changing.
Well, and I mean, Croker I think is pretty aware of it himself, but he's surrounded by it. Like, it is the world he moves in, and there's no escaping it. Yeah. And there's no changing it either. So he just sort of goes with it.
I feel like the opening paragraph is like some of the strongest like book in like openings that I've ever read. The whole that whole part is like we should have known better. We should have been forewarned. No, we should have been prepared. And it's like one eye's handicap in no way impairs his hindsight. And I'm like, that's some serious good writing right there in one sentence.
Yeah. For anybody who doesn't know AP Canavan's channel,
he did like a
Critical Dragon. He did a detailed close reading analysis of just the first paragraph or two of the first Black Company novel, and it's brilliant. Like I'm not used to looking at prose that closely. I'm much more into the story and flowing and not stopping and thinking in detail about every word and how the words are put together and stuff. But it's really interesting to read that, because it shows you very clearly how damn good Glenn Cook's writing actually is. Kath says Cook also reminded me of Bradbury in Fahrenheit 451. I have not read that yet. My first Bradbury experience was actually last year when I read Something Wicked, and it made me want to read more Bradbury.
Bradbury's interesting because he also shifts like his style like from book to book. I can see what Kathy is saying there with like Fahrenheit 501. It's like it does have that like very very abrupt sort of like very short sentence staccato kind of opening in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then you read something like his Martian Chronicles, and it's just like incredibly funny. It's like I can't even explain why the Martian Chronicles by Bradbury are so incredibly hilarious, but they're so good.
I do not know. I have not read them.
They're very much like 1950s sitcom, but on Mars, I guess.
Yeah, no, actually, a friend of mine described it in a kind of similar way, which sounds
it's basically like a poetic
odd.
Barsoom. If I that's what I would call Martian Chronicles.
But it's like far less an adventure story than Barsoom is, isn't it?
No, it's more like domestic misunderstandings and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And like colonialization and
yeah. Whereas Barsoom is like Swords and Planets adventure story. It's not similar. I wanted to suggest that we maybe do Splint.
Oh, I get to start Rough Stone Rolling.
How do we feel about a sprint? So it's 20 past. Let's go until 22 the hour.
Sounds like a plan.
That would be something 40, depending on where you are.
I'm gonna catch up with some Goon.
I think I'm gonna keep going on Hellboy.
Huh? Have you read the Goon, Matt? I think you would like it. It's very.
I have not. You have brought it up on every pub for the last like 6 pubs.
It's pretty good. It's really fun.
I haven't read it.
It's really hilarious.
Cool. Enjoy and meet yourself.
I think you would like it. Oh, sorry. If you like Hellboy.
Cool. I will check it out eventually. Later. Enjoy reading. Hello.
Hello there, Matt. Oh yes, and I am happy to announce, Matt,
What?
that there is a Hellboy Goon crossover in this, illustrated by Mike Mignola. So
Okay.
I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Because you know me, I like me some Hellboy.
Yeah, and Mignola's artwork is always a treat.
Indeed, it is.
Raph is still gone. Maybe totally gone.
Raph maybe went to go get another beer. I have no idea.
It's so good, Hellboy. It's so good. It's been a while. I read the whole thing at some point, but it's been a while. And I'm in the Wild Hunt right now.
Oh, so the Fagredo stuff. Yeah, that's good. It's good. It's good arc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also King Arthur. So I bet you're just loving it right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So have you not gotten to the King Arthur stuff yet?
I just got to the big revelation, which is kind of a spoiler, by the way.
Oh, sorry. For those who haven't watched Hellboy.
For those who haven't read Hellboy. Yeah, but it's very good. It's so good. I'm loving it.
It's
There's
one of the
also
things I have not read.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's not. I mean, I guess you can. I mean, they did it with the Sandman. You can make an audiobook of comics, but I can't even imagine an audiobook of.
I never really got that. It's more
Hellboy
like an audio
making
drama.
Any sense? Yeah.
Well, one, it's more like an audio drama. Two,
I haven't listened to.
Comics are a visual medium, you know.
Yeah. They're a very. I just imagine it being extremely difficult to separate the story from the visuals of it. But I mean, there is a story there. You probably have to flesh it out more, put more text into it so that it can actually be told as an audiobook. But the Hellboy story is so good. It's so.
I really like the short stories a lot. I love the little vignettes.
It's so much based on so much mythology from all over the world. Like it goes to Africa and gets into a whole bunch of African myths and legends, and a lot of it is very much fairy English related, but there's also Russian mythology comes to it. Baba Yaga plays a really big role in the story, and it's just so good. There's so much good stuff in there.
Yeah, it's like I don't mind not being able to play like video games that much anymore, but like not being able to actually read comic books because clearly you miss a lot of stuff is one of the things that like really annoys me. I'm like, that kind of sucks.
Yeah, and it's I mean, I play video games a lot, and it's rare that I bump into a game where I'm like, okay, that was an amazing story. Like just as far as storytelling goes, some games, like that's also one of the things that kind of
not even Red Dead 2, like
no, I mean Red Dead 2, Last of Us, some of them really do have very, very good stories.
Oh.
But most games are much more about hand-eye coordination or an addictive gameplay loop or something like that. They're not so much about a story.
I mean, you have like the more like experimental indie game stuff that does interesting things with the medium of video games. Going like
yeah. I still think, strange as it probably sounds at this point, I still think that video games are kind of in their infancy.
They are.
And they're just here and there slowly starting to figure out themselves as a medium that isn't film and isn't television, and you know, they're really not quite there yet. I can imagine so much more that could be done. And the ones that where you bump into them and you think it's a really good story are kind of interactive films.
Yeah.
In a way, you know, like Red Dead Redemption 2 is basically an interactive film.
Yeah.
And Last of Us is feels very much film, like an interactive film.
There's this one guy that did like a bunch of like really interesting, like sort of like very indie experimental games, like the one that where you basically technically play through what is like a tutorial, but the things you have to do are the opposite of what like the tutorial text tells you to do. And that's something where like this is interesting because you're clearly using the medium and playing with the medium doing something weird.
Right. Yeah. There was another one, also a very small indie game that took me about 5 hours or 6 hours to play through, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but I mean what the name was. But it was doing some really interesting things with computer graphics.
Yeah.
To create optical illusions and a really weird feeling of disorientation.
Yeah.
Which was also something that I just hadn't really seen games do. Like
Yeah.
most games are simulating a world, and they're either simulating a relatively realistic world or a cartoony one, but they've come up with kind of a world and they're simulating it. But I've never been through a game where I was like, I don't know what the hell is going on visually, spatially, or anything.
Yeah.
Now, and it had really interesting things going on in it.
Unless it's Death Stranding.
And Death Stranding is totally a simulation of a world. It's totally a simulation of a world. I love that game, but it's like it's a world simulation.
No,
I didn't really care for it. I didn't have the patience for it.
I loved it. I played it all the way through, but it's very much a simulation of a world. In fact, more detailed simulation of a world than most video games are. Like, I've never seen walking physics so specific and detailed as in Death Stranding.
Yeah, I feel like the interesting thing is for me usually when you take like a medium like video games and see what that specific medium can do that other mediums can't do, and an interactive film is not necessarily doing much with the idea of like with the medium of video games.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it took
back with what was it called? Like one of those like 3D space shooter things where you had like Mark Hamill played in the cutscenes. It was like in the 90s, and I just keep forgetting the name of it. But you know what I mean, right? Those like that kind of stuff. I'm like, we had that for a long time. So you play a mission, then you get like a couple of cutscenes that are like a movie, and then you go back and do the shooting things. Like that's not actually using the medium. Like I feel like Portal, when it came out for the first time, was doing something interesting for the time, right?
Right.
Because you got to sort of like play with the world and
and I mean, I think it's normal in all media, like when there's a completely different medium, that everybody tries to do it like the previous medium. Like if you look at television in the 50s, it was basically people doing a stage production.
Yeah.
In front of a camera.
Yeah, exactly. When you go to like old like silent movies, that's exactly what you have, and that's
not even silent movies. Like even the black and white series, like the sitcoms and whatever. I Love Lucy is a stage show with a camera. You know, it's produced on a stage in front of a live audience.
Yeah, it just takes a while for a new sort of like medium to find its language, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't feel like, other than like certainly as far as the big successful games go, video games haven't gotten there yet. They're doing kind of interactive movies with fiddly bits in between where you can wear out your thumbs.
Yeah,
but basically story-wise, they're interactive movies. Fitz, get up. She's climbing my bookshelf and trying to pull things off.
Well, I really like storytelling in video games. Well, that's usually what I look for. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I do too. But fundamentally what they're doing with the medium is an interactive movie.
Well, sure.
You know? They're not really doing anything that is unique to the medium of games yet. Thornall says, try Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous. Is that a game based on the Pathfinder role-playing game? I remember that there was one of those.
Either those or they're basically
the Pathfinder movie.
Games.
I haven't played it. And that game I was talking about with the weird perspectives and stuff, that game was not Gorogoa. I'll have to look it up.
Was it Disco Elysium?
No, Disco Elysium isn't anything like that. No, it was interesting because it was like there were a lot of bits where, for example, like you'd be going down a corridor. It all took place, felt like sort of inside a building or something. It was all interiors, and you'd be going down a hallway, and as your perspective changed as you were going down the hallway, you would realize it wasn't a hallway. It was a picture on a wall of a hallway that was actually a door into a hallway. And, there was all these weird little shifts. And there were a bunch of objects in rooms that when you looked at them, you'd see, okay, that object is over there in the corner. And then you would turn your head, your perspective away from it, and you turn back and the object would be right next to you. Or further away or whatever. And there were puzzles that you had to solve, which were purely based on lining up your perspective with a certain object and its background. And then it would change. I don't know. It's really hard to explain. Yeah. It was very, very interesting.
That's something that like you can do with video games, like play with perspective and like warping reality in a way that board games, for example, can't necessarily do.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, because there is a completely different perspective in a video game than there is in a movie, because it's me. Yeah. Right. No one is showing me something. I am going and seeing it. Yes. And I relate to a video game in a totally different way than I do a movie.
I mean, that being said, I did very much enjoy like the 90s LucasArts style point and click adventures because they developed like a very specific language for that specific kind of game. Monkey Island, Sam & Max, all of that stuff. It's like they developed like a very specific language for that specific kind of game with its very weird, quirky kind of humor and other stuff. But then
Fitz is selective about obeying voice commands. When Fitz knows she's doing something that she absolutely should not be doing, like climbing my fucking bookshelf, and I give her the serious voice, then she'll stop. But if she's just sitting up there, like she often does, and she's just sort of lightly batting at something that I would rather that she didn't knock onto the floor, I have to say Fitz like 10 times. And then once I get up if I start getting up, like if she hears my chair creak, wherever she is in the flat, she'll stop doing whatever she's doing. Because she's like, now it's serious.
That's like with children where you have to say like the full name with like the surname for them to realize that you're actually serious about something.
Yeah, exactly. Like she'll be sitting up there and I'm sitting here reading and I'll be like, Fitz. Now she's staring at me. She's like, what? I'm just sitting here. I'm not doing anything. You're yelling at me. No. She can't climb the bookshelves because they're full of books, for one. And secondly, there are also things on the shelves in front of the books that I would rather not have on the floor, which is where they will end up if she climbs the bookshelves. So no, she can't climb the bookshelves. She can get on top of the bookshelf. That's actually her favorite little track around the living room, is getting on top of one bookshelf, jumping to another one, and sitting up in a high space. And I have no problem with that. But she gets there by climbing her cat tree, not by climbing the front of the bookshelf on the books. Because books end up on the floor as well if she does that. It has happened before.
That's the one thing I was critical about with the Great Wen, because when I watched that conversation that Alan Moore had with Susanna Clarke earlier this year, he promised me the most obnoxious cat that he could imagine, and it hardly shows up in the book. It has like one scene. I'm like,
that's disappointing.
I mean, I assume it will get like incredibly obnoxious and terrible in the next like 4 books of that series, but like I was promised an obnoxious cat.
Just barely introduced an obnoxious cat. That was
instead I get Aleister Crowley drinking tea, which is, nice.
I guess.
I mean, it's new Aleister Crowley would show up because it's an Alan Moore book that takes place in 1949 with like flashbacks. It's like there's no way he's not putting in Aleister Crowley.
Yeah. Kind of
he's very much in the occult.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would expect Alan Moore to introduce Aleister Crowley anywhere. Doesn't surprise me at all.
Which is fun thing. I had to look something up about Aleister Crowley, and Google having its very specific. They have like these small AI summaries on top of stuff when you search for something, and it goes Aleister Crowley, British author and mountaineer. And that's correct, technically.
Technically correct, but a strange explanation of who the man was. Not
Well, it
what
also
he's
says-
known for.
It also says Anne Frank is a German author, which is...
Was she German?
She was born in
technically.
Germany, moved to the Netherlands when she was 4, and calling someone whose diary was published posthumously without their consent an author is also very much stretching the definition of author.
Yeah. I guess there are certain authors where you you should probably
to be
flag them and say,
fair,
let's not
she
let
was
the AI
dead.
do this.
And her dad's
But
like,
writing
"Yeah,
a diary does not turn you into an author. Publishing something
No.
or creating something for publication turns you into an author. Otherwise, you're just writing
Yeah.
a diary.
It's a significant piece of writing because
Yes.
of its context, but she wasn't really exactly an author.
fair enough."
She was writing a diary, yeah.
It's just like this is technically correct. It's also like very much missing the mark because neither is Anne Frank someone I would describe as a German author, nor is Aleister Crowley someone I would describe as an author and mountaineer.
No.
Although he held a bunch of records for being like the first Westerner to climb a bunch of like mountains in the Himalayas because he was a very, very good mountaineer.
Sure, but like when you say Aleister Crowley to anyone who knows who Aleister Crowley is, the first thing they think isn't mountaineer.
No.
Oh my, he was an amazing mountaineer. He was such a climber. No.
I guess it's more that like Google AI hasn't learned the word occultist yet.
Maybe. Yeah. Or sex magic weirdo or any of those things. I don't know. I was, as I said earlier, sick a lot of this week, and I still don't feel 100%. So I think I'm going to call it and go to bed earlier than I usually do.
I wish you a speedy further recovery, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's definitely the tail end of it, but I just realized that I am lacking some of my usual energy.
Yeah, but that's the time when you actually need to do like the resting, because otherwise you'll just like fall back down into it if you don't, right?
I have done that. I have had phases where I definitely pushed myself too hard when I was sick and not quite recovered and just got sick again, or it turned into bronchitis or something.
No, we don't want that.
Yeah.
So take a rest. I'm gonna return to the rough stone rolling.
Cool. Good to see you guys.
All right.
Everybody else in the chat as well, of course. Have a lovely week. Have a great time reading awesome stuff, hopefully. And I'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.